Support for Recovery Talks, the podcast, and rockandrecovery.com provided by Ohio Means Jobs, Summit and Medina counties, recognizing that looking for a job can be tough, especially if you're also navigating a path to recovery. Ohio Means Jobs, Summit and Medina counties offer career coaching, support services, and training for in-demand careers. For more information, summitmedinaomj.org.
Peer support is the act of people who have had similar experiences with mental illnesses and or substance abuse diagnosis. Giving each other encouragement, hope, assistance, guidance, and understanding is what it's all about. Our next guest, Danica Adams, is a peer recovery coach and mentor with Ohio Guidestone. Today, she helps families who struggle with substance use disorder, but she was on a very different path 6.5 years ago. Her story and more up next on Recovery Talks, the podcast.
Direct from Akron, Ohio, the epicenter of modern recovery. This is Recovery Talks, the podcast. From those in recovery to those working in recovery, meet those who are shining the light on Recovery Talks right now.
Welcome, everybody, to Recovery Talks, the podcast. I'm your host, Mark Lee Shannon, and today we have a very special guest. Her name is Danica Adams. Danica is a peer recovery coach and a mentor with Ohio Guidestone, and her gig is she helps families who struggle with substance use disorder, and she's got a pretty cool story, but you know what? 6.5 years ago, it wasn't really quite the same story, was it? And, before we get started, let's just say hello to Danica. Hi, Danica. How are you doing?
Good. Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm so good to see you again. I should tell our listeners that we became acquainted when I took the Ohio Peer Recovery Supporter training, and Danica was my training facilitator. Is that right? Do I call it training facilitator? Is that how I say? Or,
yes.
Or what was your title? The trainer? Yeah, is that what it was?
Yeah, facilitator.
I got a chance to research Danica's story a little bit before this podcast, and I spoke to her and I said that I had no idea she had been through what the things she had been through, because when we did the training, it was so professional and it was all, here's the training and here's what you need to do. But I had no idea about your story. So why don't we start at the beginning of the beginning? Danica, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and, how you got to this place where we're having a podcast about recovery, but it wasn't always that story, especially 6.5 years ago. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
I will start from the very beginning. I was a survivor of childhood trauma, extensive childhood trauma. My sister was sick. She got sick when she was 11 with brain cancer. She died when I was 14. I grew up in downtown Zanesville, right off 7th Street. Didn't really have that much supervision. And so I was able to kind of do a lot of things, seen a lot of things. I was exposed early to a lot of different things. I moved a lot. I went to a lot of different schools due to my sister being ill. I just wanted an escape. And so I got pregnant with my son when I was 14 years old. And I became a teen mom. Me and my son's father were very happy together at that point. And, we thought we had it all figured out. It wasn't long after that we really got addicted. We had already been smoking cigarettes and smoking weed and drinking, at least on the weekends. And that became a more regular habit. And then eventually we got into harder substances. So when I was 17, I got arrested for a couple of different charges, assault with a weapon, fleeing the scene, a couple of different things. And that's when I went to jail and was facing felony charges for the first time at 17 years old. I got involved with children's services, introduced to probation, was told to go get a drug and alcohol assessment. I was told to go to AA, and I literally thought they wanted me to get insurance. And so I thought that was easy. And it was not. So I got introduced to a 12-step program at 17 years old. For the next 2 years, really tried to use and get away with it. I was very manipulative. I tried to normalize my erratic behaviors to people. I would dilute drug screens or detox myself or just simply hide. And that was a sick process for years. I did get custody of my son back. And 2 months later, I lost custody of him again. My parents did get custody of my son. I just spiraled from there. My addiction took me to a lot of really dark places. I was a survivor of domestic violence. I had multiple incarcerations, multiple overdoses, multiple treatment centers. I was experienced homelessness. I'm a survivor of human trafficking and prostitution. None of that got me sober. There were years of trauma that I created for my family, and none of that got me sober. I'll be honest with you. What got me sober is I was in a treatment center, and I was like 12 days from graduation, time to getting ready to go home. I was starting to get better. That last time when I was getting sober, then I was mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually dead. Physically, it was really bad. I could not look you in the eye. I could not make a sentence. I could not function as a human being. And so I started getting better. I had about 4 months sober, and I started getting better. And I was getting ready to graduate and go home, and I relapsed. I went to jail sober, and I had never done that before. I never went to jail sober. I never thought I was going to go to prison. And I did this time, and I thought that I would never see my parents or my son ever again. And I had that moment of radical acceptance, raw humility of myself in that moment of what life was going to be like for me. And I knew I was done. I knew that there was nothing I could do. And I'll be honest with you, Mark, if they would have let me out of jail the next day, I would have relapsed again. But they didn't. And my probation officer seen something in me, and I got to go to treatment again. And I went to a women's residential treatment, and I was there for almost 9 months. And that's what started my recovery journey. I've been sober ever since.
9 months in treatment. I mean, I think that's the number I hear a lot of people talk about is it's not a few months. It's enough time to really get your brain to start working again. And also, as you know, get over that realization when you finally get sober of what did I do? What did I do? You do that whole accounting. And it takes, and for me, I don't know, unless I had a lot of support, but when I finally came to grips with everything I had to see sober, I didn't like it. I didn't like any of it. So at this point, you're sober and you get out. And what were the first few miles like? I've
been home now for almost 6 years. And that's great. I got home in July of 2016. And let me tell you about those first couple months. I was desperate to do anything to stay sober. I was desperate. I remember prior going in and out of the rooms of a 12-step program. Prior to me getting sober, I was anxious, humiliated, embarrassed, didn't want to be there, all these feelings. And this time, I was fearless. Like I went to a meeting and I talked to people and I asked for numbers and I asked when they were going to another meeting and asked if they would pick me up and asked what they were doing after the meeting and if I could go with them. I hung out with women who had long-term sobriety and nothing less because I needed to stay sober. I went to church and I got active in my church fellowship, again, doing anything that I could. And there's a little story about it. So I went to do a blitz build with Habitat for Humanity with my church. And I was like, well, who's going to build the rest of this house? And they're like, oh, well, we take volunteers. And I'm like, okay, great. I'll show up. And I went and built this house with Habitat for Humanity. And the main team lead, who was almost the only guy there ever with me, was also in recovery. And so as I was doing this build with him, it was like a meeting every single day, being with somebody in recovery who could support me. But that was God showing up in my life in ways that, I never would have imagined.
Doing for us what we could not do for ourselves, right? That's it. Yeah.
Right. Yep. I had to interview about 15 different times, 15 different places before I got a job due to my record. But I was able to get a job finally. I had nothing. When I went into rehab, I didn't even have clothes on my back. My mom brought me clothes out of her closet. I didn't have ID, social security card, anything. And so I had to start from nothing. I did get to go and live with my parents and my son after rehab. And that's where I resided, and until I was able to get out on my own, and I did what they told me to stick with the winners, and not to hang out with people in early recovery because two sickies don't make a welly, and so
I really had forgotten that one. I had forgotten that one. That's a good one. I haven't heard that for a long time. Yeah.
They said we would get each other high before we got each other sober. And so again, desperate to do anything. I did what they told me. Got a job, started saving money, was able to get a car and did everything I needed to stay sober and get well.
We're talking with Danica Adams, who's a peer recovery coach and mentor with Ohio Guidestones. So the curious question I had for you, which I don't really know if we really covered or you really spoke about during the 2 weeks we had together during the training session was, at what point after you had some sobriety, did you make the decision that you wanted to do the peer recovery coach role? Maybe you can tell people a little bit about what a peer recovery coach is in the state of Ohio.
It's so funny that you ask. I did not know that this is what I wanted to do. Matter of fact, the other women that I was in residential treatment with were like, oh, I'm going to go be a counselor and this and all that. And I thought, oh, absolutely not me. And so basically, there was a woman in the rooms who approached me one day and mentioned that there were peer support classes. And I was kind of in a tiffy at this point. I had thousands of dollars of student debt. I was working, barely getting minimum wage, and she mentioned that there was this peer support training and it was free. And I thought, well, why not? Let's see what this is about. And that's how I got involved with peer support. It was an opportunity that was presented, that was reasonable, and it became my true purpose.
Just for our listeners, I want to go back to the training manual, my participant guide for the Ohio Peer Recovery Supporter Training Manual. And I just want to read real quickly just a definition of what peer recovery support is. And it says here, the peer support is the act of people who have had similar experiences with mental illnesses and or substance use diagnosis, giving each other encouragement, hope, assistance, guidance, and understanding that aids in recovery. Peer support work can be done anytime, anywhere, when two or more peers are in a mutually supportive relationship. Also, it says a peer recovery supporter is a person with a lived experience of a serious life challenge who helps others on their recovery journey. A peer recovery supporter is a person who has experienced a substance use disorder and or a psychiatric condition that has progressed on his or her path to recovery and has acquired the knowledge and skills to help others with their day-to-day experiences and their own recovery journeys. And I go right over to the very first day, the very first thing, the very first note I made in my journal. It was, what is peer recovery support? And the number one goal was to instill hope, right? Because I don't know about you, but for me, I was a pretty hopeless case. I sensed that you also went through the experience of trying everything and just feeling that you just were never going to get it. That, you were just the person that wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't of the right character to be able to get sober like other people around us that we saw. I kept asking, why can't I do this? Was that something you experienced also?
Briefly, yeah. I remember being in jail and calling my mom and swearing to her that I was going to stay sober. All I needed was to get a job and be a good mom, that I never wanted to use again. And I meant it. And I meant it with every inch of me. But the disease of addiction was so real that it wouldn't be long once I got released that I would be back to the races out there using again. And I didn't understand why.
We're going to take a short break now. We're talking with Danica Adams, who is a peer recovery coach and mentor with Ohio Guidestones. We'll be right back after this.
Our lives are not lived sequentially. After all, we're not a DVR. We have lives that take us in multiple directions, and sometimes absorbing our favorite podcasts are done sporadically and out of sync. We might have large amounts of time to listen and get caught up on episodes, and other times life in general just, gets in the way. But here's the thing. Every guest, every topic, every journey from the darkness into the light has been and will be captured and preserved at recoverytalks.org. Miss an episode? No, you didn't. Every one of them is safely stored and kept in one place, designed to be listened to whenever life allows it. Recovery Talks, the podcast, at recoverytalks.org.
Okay, and now we're back with Danica Adams, who is a peer recovery coach. Danica, I was just wondering, for the people out there who don't really know what a certified peer recovery supporter is, what is it you do? What is your job like? Tell us a little bit about what a day would look like for you.
Sure. So I am lucky to work at Ohio Guidestone, which is an outpatient community-based program. That means that I am in the community doing my work, rarely ever in an office setting. And so I get to meet my peers where they're at. I get to meet them in their homes, in the community. I get to transport them and take them places wherever they may need to go, whether it's some type form of a meeting, a court hearing, grocery store, in the community to do activities of that nature. Usually informal one-on-one meetings is what I do. I do recovery planning and goal setting with them. I use person-centered planning and a strength-based approach to really support the people that I work with. I work with families usually that are affected by the child welfare system. And so really supporting them on a reunification with their family and reclaiming their truth and their lives and their identity.
That's just so fantastic. So you must be able to go to work and see some pretty difficult things during the day. And I have a lot of questions about that, but I mean, what are some of the challenges that you face in your job? I mean, what are the things that, if we could sum up for our listeners what peer recovery supporters face every day, what are some of the biggest challenges for you?
I don't really see much of it as challenging. I think maybe the challenging pieces that I experience are that compassion fatigue, the burnout, when I've been working with somebody for so long and it maybe feels like I'm not getting anywhere with them. Or I think the biggest challenge that I face is when an individual disengages from services and I cannot get in contact with them. More challenges that I face, I think, is more with in the clinical setting, maybe when I'm advocating for a peer and not really getting what we want right now and facing those types of challenges.
What are some of the examples of things when you have to advocate for somebody and you face obstacles or orange barrels?
My advocacy is usually based around parents getting more parenting time with their families or with their children and maybe not getting court involved or advocating for financial support or some stuff of that nature, if that makes sense.
So what type of person would be, I mean, if you were going to say to people who maybe don't know anything about substance use disorder, people don't know anything about what we do as peer supporters, what would you say to people who say, how do I know how to get a hold of people like this? How do I reach people? My son needs a peer supporter, or I need a peer supporter. How do I find out about it?
You can call your local Adam H. board if you have an Adam H. board. Most behavioral health agencies have peer supporters, as they have peer supporters employed. Also, maybe if you have a peer center in your community, there are often peer drop-in centers, peer-led organizations that are happening. So you could research them, Google them, or like I said, call your Adam H. board and see, and they would definitely be happy to connect you. You may also call the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and they could tell you maybe where peers are in your community.
I got to tell you, one of the things I hear from people who work and employ peer supporters is that, it's tough to find, it's tough to keep peer supporters. And I think you touched a little bit on what that is. And, Danica, I don't do anything like what you do. I work as a volunteer in a couple different places, and I come home some days and I'm like, don't talk to me. I encountered, either difficulties or people that really needed help, or people's cases are just so tragic that it just breaks your heart. I can't imagine how you do this every day. I mean, how do you get up every day and do this? How do you do this?
Well, that's a good question as well. I don't see it as a job. It is a true purpose and a true passion for me, because I do it because I wish somebody was there for me when it was me. And that's what really drives me, is to be that safe person in somebody's life that they know that they can trust and that supports them no matter what. Yeah, I'm just really thankful to be that in somebody else's life, even though it's challenging.
Right. You get to be the evidence that recovery works. I think that's what really keeps a lot of the peer supporters going, is when you get out there and you can self-identify as a person in successful long-term recovery. Like, look, it wasn't easy. It's not easy, but it does happen. And you know what? Guess what? You're looking at one. You made it through.
Here's my thing, Mark, is that there is so much help out there. There are people who care about people out there. There's a way. There's hope. Recovery is real. But there is also so much stigma out there as well, that people maybe don't believe that there is help and resources, or fear accepting that help, or maybe just aren't ready and don't know how, and I want people to know that there is a way out. And I want to be that voice for the voiceless, because this addiction and mental illness is real. And we've already lost so many people to it. So I go out there and do my thing and help make that change in the world.
There's an article that I was reading right before this podcast that stated that in the United States, nearly 90% of people with substance use disorders and 35% of people with serious mental illness do not receive treatment. They just don't get it. If you had one wish or a wish to help people understand a little bit better, what it is, make us do what we want to do to help other people, what would it be? What would you tell people? What would be the one wish that you could make other people understand a little bit better, and to be more compassionate to people in substance use disorder recovery?
I would want people to know that we are more than our diseases, and that we are more than our diagnoses, and that we do get better, and we can have somewhat, normal lives. I think that's the one thing that I want people to know, is that when they see somebody who's struggling in whatever form it is, they start to see that and start to see the person as their diagnosis or their disease. And that is not the case. People do get better, and there is hope for that. Even if they seem hopeless, even the most hopeless can get better.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. And that wasn't generic at all for me. Not at all. So we're talking about Danica and how Danica Adams stays well. What are some of the go-to get you through things that you do to take care of yourself?
Well, I have so many. For one, I thrive on structure and routine. And so I stick to that every day, every week. I have things that I just do that make me better. I recently discovered this app. It is the Finch self-care app. It is my little self-care pet, and he holds me accountable every day to do my self-care techniques. It's a little app that I recently found that really brings me great joy. We live in a world of technology, so I have tons of apps that just improve my life. And so I have my physical health apps, my mental health apps. I have Being, BEING. That's one of my apps right now. Different other types of audio apps, whatever topic that I'm looking forward to that I do on a regular basis. I do my prayer and meditation, and really that time for me, because I do so much and I am so busy. making sure I have time for me and I have time for my family. I do work a 12-step program, so I go to meetings and work with my sponsor regularly. I go to the gym, I do yoga, little things like that. I have 6 fur babies that take care of me more than I take care of them. And so I love on them and spend time with them, whatever that looks like. And I just make sure I take care of myself. Little things that I do throughout the day is making sure I have that positive self-talk. I'm not wondering too much in my own mind, that I can find positive solutions and outcomes for the challenges that I face. And I remind myself exactly who I am, because that matters. Because every day that I live with a mental illness or a substance use disorder is another day that I'm constantly fighting. And so I push myself even when I don't want to, and even when it's hard. And just remember that it's temporary, this will pass, and that it's not always going to be hard like this.
One of the things I sensed from you during the training was that you were a person who had overcome a great deal, and you didn't need to wear it on your sleeve. There was just a quiet confidence of the way you presented yourself that was very assured. And I think that this is a common characteristic of people who are successful in long-term recovery from substance use disorder and mental health issues. It's kind of like we're wearing this military uniform, right? You know, the ones with the stripes on our left forearm, you know, those hash marks that show the years of service. I think all of us can look down at those and go, you know what? We earned them. We earned them. You know, I just want to say thank you for all our listeners out there for listening to Recovery Talks, the podcast. You know, you can find us at recoverytalks.org. And if you like what you hear, there's a lot more episodes there. Be sure you like and share and do all the things that you can do to be able to share this. Thanks again, Danica, for spending some time with us and our listeners. And today, I want you to know that just by sharing that story, I'm sure that someone out there is helped by that. So on behalf of them and me, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you so much as well.
To all our listeners, just remember, you know, that, no matter what's going on, rain or shine, you can always find us at recoverytalks.org. And until the next time we get to talk, remember to stay connected, stay standing, and steady on.